everybody. My name's Adrienne. I'm the little creature in the middle of the other folks on the screen that you can see. Part of my job is usually hanging out with a whole bunch of product folks. I'm at meetups, I'm running conferences, but during these times, all I can do is just reminisce and think about the good times we used to have. I'd like to call out a thank you to the sponsors that have put on this great event. It's a month-long event, and the work I'm sure will pay off. Today, I'm going to talk to you about product management, specifically about leading in product management. I'm going to take a wild guess at this stage and think that the folks behind my screen would have worked with a product manager at some point in a project. Would have wanted to throttle a product manager at some point in the project, or potentially maybe a product manager. So I'm hoping that I cover the foundations of product and talk to you about how to lead through product management. Before I begin, I want to say that every business does product management, even if you don't know that you're doing it. You're doing it knowingly or unwittingly. But not every business has a formal product management function. It's distributed. Somebody might think about the customer, someone might think about a whole list of features and functions that the product needs to have. But if you don't have a product function in your business, it's done by others. But every business does product management. So what is product management? There are lots of different definitions, making it really confusing. A famous one, which you might or might not have seen, it would have been represented in the image to the right, which is, the intersection of UX, tech, and business. That was coined by Martin Erickson. Marty Kagan says that product management is all about discovering something that is valuable, usable, and feasible. Valuable for the business, usable for customers, and feasible to create. And a more kind of formal definition is one by Atlassian. Product management is an organizational function that guides every step of the product's life cycle. So from development right up to product retirement, and hopefully considering the customer in between. At its core though, product management is a function in an organization that is there to create customer value and deliver something of benefit to organizations. And you'll hear this term often if you're a product manager, or even if you're not. We're always talking about customer value, and it seems so ephemeral. It's so hard to kind of grasp. What is customer value? Well, customer value is a combination really of delivering some sort of, or receiving some benefits. And it might be, and in these days, it might be toilet paper, it might be electricity, in happier times, it might be social status, it might be knowledge. And also, as a part of that equation, there's a cost to the customer receiving that benefit. And customers pay for it in time, effort, or money, and potentially sharing their information. So the idea is that in order to receive great customer value, the benefits needs to be higher than the cost. And benefits are received when we are solving problems for customers. If, for example, if a product doesn't solve a particular problem for me, I'm not going to pay it much attention. I might think of it as something quite fun to have occasionally, but if it doesn't resonate and if it doesn't solve a key problem, then I'm not going to pay too much attention and I'll let it wither. And look, on the right-hand side of the screen, I've got what I call a value pyramid. And most times, companies who create products and services really focus on the functional benefits, things that save you time, that makes you money, reduces your risk. But the idea is that if you go up the value chain, if you go up and solve more emotional problems, life-changing problems, customers will pay more attention to you and hopefully hold on to your product and don't disappear. So the idea is that you go up the value chain, and when you're up the value chain, you have more chances of the customer hanging on to your product. Look, most of you would have seen this. This is a value proposition canvas. It's, everybody, non-product people use it. Loads of different kinds of people use it. And the idea is that you solve a customer problem by understanding their wants, fears, and needs through a solution. But unfortunately, most of the time, what happens is that we focus on the solution and we never focus on the problem. And if we focus on solutions and the products that we bring to market and never think about the customer, there are things that happen. There are consequences that happen. And these result in languishing product, or more investments in sales and marketing, and potentially, which is what you don't want, shorter than expected product life cycles. So if you focus on your solution and never think about the customer problem, your product's not going to succeed in the market. And I think that lots of businesses these days tend to do a lot of that. They tend to react. They tend not to focus on their customers. They tend to focus internally, the problems that the business wants to solve, and they think about their products without actually considering the customer. If that's the case, if you don't put the customer at the center of what you do, then you're going to have all the problems that we've just talked about. This is a great quote, and it really summarizes what I think product management's all about. Ultimately, customers really don't care about your product or the solutions. What they care about are the problems that your product solves. But, I talk about product management, and most people think, is it new? And most people think it is new because it's, been in our narrative, in the business language, in our vernacular for the last 5 years. But really, product management has been around since the 1930s in fast-moving consumer goods. Person that created Camay soap wanted to differentiate the soap from all the other soaps that were in the market. And so he had to think about, how to position Camay, the soap, amongst its competitors. And that's the genesis of product management. It's certainly, been top of mind over the last 5 to 10 years when we're producing products at a rapid pace. We've got technology that enables that production and development cycle. And so the faster we create products, the more people are required to think about what products need to be brought to the market. But let's talk about the basics. What is a product? A product is essentially a combination of goods and services. It's more importantly, it needs to satisfy a need for a specific market. And so here's where you have to think about who your customer is. You can't think about the problem if you have no idea who your customers might be. And it's deliberately created. It's not accidental or not naturally occurring. And here you see, an example of someone receiving a bunch of flowers. There's a lot of thought that went into that, a lot of packaging, a lot of positioning about, selling those flowers, receiving those flowers. Whereas flowers, you can get flowers anywhere really in a field. That's not a product. But when we start to think about who the customer might be and what problems we might solve for them, and it's kind of a deliberate act, that's when we actually get a product. And also it's intended for trade or commerce, right? We have to exchange it. And if you think back about that customer value, we're exchanging it for some sort of cost as a customer. So you can go to a cafe, order some food and pay for it, or you can receive some food, or you can cook your own food at home. That isn't a product in itself, but the act of going to the cafe and buying the food is. Now, this is normally quite controversial amongst my non-product friends, sometimes amongst my product friends as well, but a product encompasses the entire customer experience, right? And here we have a hotel, a resort. Now, when people think about a hotel, they don't necessarily only think about the bed and the shower. they think about the entire experience. And if any one part of that experience isn't cohesive, isn't delivering to expectations, well, then the customer's going to go, well, I really thought the bed was clean, so I'm going to come back. They'll say, oh my goodness, well, that part of the experience failed, and therefore the entire product in my head as a consumer has failed, and therefore I won't be going back to that resort. And so this is an important concept, because when we're making product, we're not only making the features and functions of a product, we have to think about that entire experience, making sure that it's solid, that it delivers to what the customer expectations are, right from the sales part of the process to product retirement. We talk about products, we talk about its, product management being around for a while, but how do we do product management? What's the secret sauce? I think lots of companies probably have that question. Look, in order to do good product management, we need a repeatable process. We can't have loads of people running around, ideating or asking for features and functions, or spending too much time working on design. It needs to be a repeatable process. And essentially, there's two modes to this process, and I'll step you through it sequentially. On the left-hand side, where you see product strategy and life cycle, that's what we call mode 1, operation mode. Most companies have products in the market, and most companies need to figure out how to optimize the results they're getting from their product, how to optimize the product itself, and so they strategically think about how to position it, existing products, how to manage it, how to make sure that it exceeds its growth phase. On the right-hand side, but once they're thinking about that, once they're in lifecycle management, they will then find and discover opportunities to improve that product. And then you go to mode 2, where it's the product development mode, where there is a specific set of activities that you would perform to consider taking these ideas that we've thought were quite good from concept right up to launch. Now, this is the BrainMates product management framework. And look, there are many out there. This is, this is not, you would create your own. It should be tailored to your organization and your organizational culture. But essentially in the BrainMates framework, we have 3 phases, which is the innovate phase, the design phase, and the implement phase. And I know, these days when we're collaborating and we're very iterative, sometimes it's very difficult to kind of figure out whether you're ideating or you're exploring, but we've been quite deliberate in this instance and articulated the steps essentially, so people know what to do and when to move forward. So in the innovate phase, there are 3 steps. There's ideate, explore, and focus. And essentially, there's loads. We start from the premise where there's loads of ideas in the business. In fact, there's generally too many and you don't know which one to work on. And the purpose of ideate is to essentially either generate, collect the ideas and rank them, right? Which ones should we work on first? Which one should we spend precious resources just even considering it? Then we move into explore, where we try and validate the idea that we've prioritized. We validate the idea against the external marketplace. What's happening? Who should this idea be for? What problem does this idea solve? Who else is solving this idea? Is this idea novel, or is it, a Me Too idea? Where does it fit in the marketplace? And in the focus stage, we then say if there is some validity to the idea when it's compared to other ideas in the market or other products in the market, we ask ourselves, should we as a business figure out whether we should spend some time and money on it? Or is it so far outside of our strategic plan that really we should park it, And we use this very funny example where Harley Davidson generally makes motorcycles. And at one stage they made, I think, perfume. And it was like, well, that there might be a need for perfume, but really should Harley Davidson really make perfume? And the answer really is no. And the next stage is the design stage, and that's where we bring our teams together to really focus on the customer problem and how to solve that customer problem. Once we figure out how to solve the customer problem, then we start to define the solution so that we can go into product build. And most importantly, and an area where people tend to kind of neglect and forget is the implement phase. And in this phase, you're building your product, you're preparing it for launch in the market, which means that you have to bring your teams together to consider the messaging that you're going to communicate to the market. What's the product's value? Where is it positioned? How will you position it to others? And more importantly, and again, this is something that we tend to overlook, is that we also need to make sure that our business is ready for that internal launch, which means that do we have the processes to support it? Do we have the people? Do they understand? Are they trained? Can they answer phone calls? We need to think about all of those elements during the implement phase. And look, this conversation, this narrative that I have really falls back to that idea that I shared with you, that the product is the entire experience. So if you're not preparing your internal businesses for launch of your product, well, then part of that experience may not be good. And in which case, has your product really succeeded? All the things that I talk about and explain, you would know about, and irrespective of whether you're a product manager or not, you would have heard about the lean startup. You would have heard about human-centered design and of course agile. So this framework actually pulls together all the elements of those great methods and techniques in a sequential way that people can follow. This is where I think we need to talk about product management in real life. I shared with you, a way of doing product management, and absolutely on a piece of paper. And you need to know it. Absolutely need to understand what your playbook's all about, what your what your practices and your processes are. But in real life, this is what's happened, right? There's so many, words. I call it methodology soup. There's so many techniques. There's so many tools and templates. It's just a mess. It's really hard to pull apart. And in reality, what happens is that, you've got people practicing agile in one corner. You've got people doing design thinking, and, they would have spent some time talking to customers. And all of that great information and knowledge is kind of not connected to the agile teams who are making stuff. Potentially, some of it there might be a stream of work where someone did some great research, then they've built something and they're testing it, and they're iterating around it. But what I see is that a lot of this happens in pockets across the business, and it happens in isolation. So it's well and good that you do agile, but if you don't link up, your design thinking practice with your agile, it's not going to be very useful. And as I said, teams tend to replicate the same work. In silos in businesses, I might be researching a particular market, and the guys and the teams, down the hallway, or in different houses these days, might be doing the same thing. And that is a very expensive problem to manage. And thirdly, as practitioners, we tend to focus on methods and outputs, right? I've done that journey map instead of I've uncovered that problem that I'm about to solve, and I've solved that problem. So we tend to overly focus on methods and outputs instead of outcomes. And so what happens in businesses? What happens in product teams? What happens when teams try and build things together? And in my experience, this is what happens. And I've felt it many, many a times. I've built all sorts of different kinds of products where, the marketer says, well, if it's going on a website, it's a marketing channel, not a product. And those kinds of, conversations tend to lead to Periods of non-activity, we're constantly fighting instead of actually focusing on our customers and building products that help them solve a problem. And, you know, as much as I like to show you great frameworks, product management, the issues that I'm talking about are real human issues. And as the folks at Atlassian say, teamwork is really kind of tough. I won't swear, just in case. And so you've got this great divide, right? You've got this great divide where, you know, I have a bunch of people here wanting to do some amazing work, yet I can't kind of cross the chasm. So how do I go about doing it? You know, absolutely practices and processes and methods, tools help. But what else? What else can we do? What else can we do to solve the human issues? And I've been thinking about this a lot, and I guess it stemmed from my work with a particular company where the only thing that, and it was a 3-year project really, and it was not a big product to build, were a set of principles. How will we operate together, right? What will bring us together? How will we cross that chasm? Well, what are principles? A principle really is a concept that guides behavior. And it isn't a mission or a vision statement, and we're so good at putting some of those together, but those aren't principles. So let's spend some time really kind of teasing out what principles are all about. As I said, product management is all about people management. Absolutely, we play with lots of tech and we make stuff out of it, but at the heart of it, if we don't get our people management right, it really means that, you know, we're stalled and we don't create great products. And so to build and maintain relationships that facilitates the design and development of products and services, and making sure that our plane just doesn't tank and fall, you know, in a ditch. We need that kind of shared safety net. And so I think that shared safety net, as I said, is that set of team product principles. How do we get together as a team, and how do we create something that enables and empowers our teams? Because we don't want to ultimately have managers, or we don't want to individually have oversight, and we don't really want to supervise people and say, hang on a minute, that's really bad behavior. That's not the way that you should do discovery, or hey, you haven't done this, you know, design in a way that we had agreed. So how do we then work more cohesively together? And the idea about principles is that it replaces processes that control our behavior and enables the team to make some, you know, good decision making. And what do you do with these team principles once we've created it? Well, like I said, it acts as a social contract, it binds the team together. It does help us establish better tooling. Once we set that foundational set of principles, it will help us create better tools. And it's a fallback. When you have a set of principles, it'll help you make some decisions during some really tough times. You know, when you can't agree on certain things, you would say, hang on a minute, we had agreed, this was our principle, why are we behaving badly? And you can always refer to it to motivate people, to remind them to change and improve their behavior, and hopefully at a product level, that it helps us promote and maintains product consistency, so you don't build weird parts to your product. But let's not generalize. Let's talk about the types of principles, right? I see it as 3 layers, essentially. One, that you as a product practitioner, or, you know, a person in a product team, has these set of personal product principles that describes your practice. How do you go about making products? How do you go about participating? And then you have, on the second layer, team product principles that describes how the team interacts and practices product. And at the third layer, you also have a set of principles that describes how you'll develop the product. And the question there that we have to ask ourselves is, what won't we compromise on? Excuse me. when we're making our product principles, we need to ask ourselves, what won't we compromise when we're building our product? So let me show you some examples. Let's talk about some of personal product principles. And for me, it took me ages to write some of my principles down. My first one is I like to make simple products. That means that the products that I make won't have, won't be stuffed full of features, because I want to be focused. I want to be focused on solving a problem for one target market. The other thing that I'll make note of is I like to write things down. And these days, when we're talking about agile and we're talking about collaboration, we often forget to write things down. We often forget to write down, our product vision, some of the user stories. We think that conversation is sufficient. And while conversation is really important, writing things down means that it's more cohesive. Our thinking is done before we communicate. And so I do like to write my user stories down. I do like to write that product narrative. I do like to think about what the product's going to be before I start to engage others, because then I can engage on a better, more confident level. And look, I've got other examples as well. This is a guy who is a product person in Singapore. You can see some of his principles there. Don't fear failure, but don't celebrate it either. This is my mate, Amanda Ralph. She's a great product person at Qantas. Hi, Amanda, if you're listening. And here's some of her principles. For her, it's important to get stuff done. Number 2 is a really interesting one. She says, an idea is not an opportunity. We have lots and lots of ideas. It doesn't mean that, people like them, want them. The world doesn't need any more ideas, and it may not be an opportunity. So for her, she's going to do a lot more work with considering whether, an idea, how to take an idea from idea stage right up to opportunity stage. And then at the second level, hi.
I have a question. Nobody else has asked a question, but the product principles concept is really interesting to me, and I was wondering if it is the same as or different than agile team norms.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like, do you see them as different things? And if yes, what is the difference?
Look, I think it depends on which layer we're talking about. So the layer that I have spoken about is at an individual level. So before you kind of establish your team, you need to understand how you practice product as an individual, because I think that if you're not really clear about what gets you excited or what triggers you, then it's very hard to participate as a team. Now, some of that agile norms might be similar to the product team principles that I'm about to talk about, but then there's that third layer, which is about the product itself. Like, how will we build product? What are some of the principles? And you could look at it like design principles.
Nice. I probably jumped a little bit ahead on your slide there, but thank you. You definitely answered my question.
No problems. Okay, well, here are some of the product team principles. So after you've done your, you know who you are as a person. Sometimes we don't. Here are some of the product team principles. And this is one from Facebook. It's on a wall on Facebook. We talk about number 6, we sweat the details nobody else can see. And so if you think back about some principles, you're like, okay, if I'm part of a team and I'm making a product, I think I would use this in a way by questioning the team. Did we sweat all the details? Irrespective of whether, our customers can see it, did we consider everything? So this is how I would use some of these kind of team principles. This is a media company called Mick. And you see they've got quite a few, actually. They've got 13 team principles, product team principles. Number 6 is one I particularly like. It's not your job. So don't let things go to the keeper because you think it's not your job. Raise your hand. And so these are kind of, you could say they're like agile norms. You could substitute them. It depends on where and how your teams are structured. And these are the third layer, which is the product principles. And I'll show you some examples of how other people create some product principles. This is the digital transformation agency, and you can see that they've kind of mixed their principles. But if you look at 5, 6, and 7, they talk about the product itself, which is make it secure. No one cares if your product isn't secure. This is a government agency. Consistent and responsive design, open standards, and common platforms. So if you were new to the DTA, for example, and you saw those, it is such a great kind of learning tool to go, oh, is it sufficiently secure? Is my design responsive? Am I building on the right platform? Those are how I would use the product principles. And this is Airtasker. Now, these are kind of more detailed. Number 3, it says customers remain in control and maintain accountability for tasks posted and work completed. So that's such a great principle when you're, building, I don't know, sign up, for example. Are customers in control? Or have you relinquished, or are you taking control away from the customer? I think these are great questions to ask yourself. And so this is how you would use these principles. They're like a guiding tool. Gather minimal required customer data and build data over time. So am I asking the customer, 15 questions when they come to my sign up process? Or am I asking just for their name and their email address? And is that sufficient? Well, this principle says that's fine. You can go ahead, just ask them for their name, for example, and their email address. And over time, as you interact, you'll ask them for more data. So how do you use it? As an onboarding tool, and I've made reference to that. And for people who are new to the business, it's great to show them some of your principles. Before a road mapping session, you can talk about your product team principles. Hey guys, let's remind ourselves before we start to, spend sufficient hours arguing over what feature goes into what roadmap, or if it does or doesn't. Well, let's remind ourselves how to behave. And 2, if we do have some product principles, let's remind ourselves what's important and how we'll prioritize. As I said, as a prioritization tool, I'm way ahead of myself. As a cultural tool, this is how we behave, guys. If you don't, if this is not important to you, then perhaps you're in the wrong team. Importantly, how do you go about creating these team principles, these product team principles? I think, and I've done this on numerous occasions with our team at BrainMates or with some of our consulting clients, is to actually kick it off formally. You don't want to bring people in a room and say, hey guys, what are your principles? I think that's kind of confronting. And as I said, when I was doing mine, it took a long time to write because I really wanted to make it meaningful and useful. So you want to kick it off formally, and you want to give individual homework. You want people in your team to have something to think about before they kind of bandy together again. And again, when I reflect back on how I created mine, it's like, what are my personal values? What problems is it that I want to solve? And how do I work? Am I kidding myself when I say, hey, customers are really important, I'm going to do some research? But then if I reflect back on my current, my practices, and I never did that, well, then I'm lying to myself. So I think that's a really kind of come to Jesus conversation with yourself, to ask yourself, what are your values? How do you currently work? And what problems is it that you want to solve? And I think once you've kicked it off formally, everyone's done their homework, they come together again to share with others. And it's interesting to identify kind of differences between individuals. And what you'll see, though, is that if you've hired correctly, that there's a lot of consistency, a lot of similarities, which is great. And that's what you want to work on. Like every good consultant, there's always a template, and there's one, that I've put together and you can use it later. But like I say, you want to find the patterns. What are the patterns that you're looking for? And those that's how you start to build your team principles and your product principles. And the product principles could be for, different products. And it might mean that you might have different product principles for different products. And then step 4 is co-creating the team principles. these are kind of gotchas. Like, you want to make sure that your principles help teams make decisions, that they're not overly long statements that are not meaningful. So you want to go back, once you've created it, you want to just check back. Does it help? Does it help me make decisions? And the answer is no. I think you need to toss it. Check that it's applicable to your business. You know, if you were working in government and security, you know, making everything freely available, non-secure data can be accessed, well, that's really kind of not applicable to a government organization. And COVID-19 app is a really good example of that. And they should be pithy and memorable, not long-winded where nobody can remember them. But ultimately the goal is to manage the principles. So if you feel that people, more than the people, but if you feel that your team aren't behaving, then you go, did I get my principles correct? Hey guys, let's just talk about this. Is this still applicable, or do we need to change it because we're diverging from our principles? So then it's a really great conversation to have. And instead of isolating it and making a difficult conversation more difficult, well, then you're using the principles to kind of rally around. But before you go, before we say goodbye and you ask me lots of questions, I want to leave you with this. I want to remind you of this, that don't start with the tools of the trade, which is where I think most companies end up. But super important to have a product management process and framework and a whole bunch of things like that, and understanding how you do it. But don't start with that. That'll come after. Start with your people, because that's where the real value lies. These are the people that will make the best products for your customers. And that's me. If you've got questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you so much, Adrienne. Before people unmute, I know because someone very helpful messaged me that not everyone has access to the chat. So a few people do and some people don't, unfortunately. What that means is that you'll have to share your lovely voices with us if you would like to ask Adrienne a question, unless you happen to have my personal phone number, as someone on this call does.
It'd be really good to.
We'd love to hear your questions if you're willing to unmute. Just reminding that we are recording, so if you unmute, you will be recorded and we're publishing. So to make you aware of that so that you're comfortable. But yes, please unmute if you have any questions for Adrienne. Or use the chat if you can see it. So we've got a comment from Joel, who can use the chat. Awesome. Says, brilliant session, Adrienne. Thanks so much for sharing your knowledge and experience. Well done. I learned heaps. That's lovely to hear.
Awesome. Thanks. I'm just going to put something else back here, the competition for participants.
Oh, yeah. Gosh, would have got me in trouble there.
I don't want to get you into trouble.
No, we're all good. So we are running a competition across the month. The QR code that you see here, which we'll get Adrienne to leave up for a moment so that you can grab your phones and take a picture, is applicable only to this week, so today and tomorrow. To be eligible to win our mysterious prizes, of which we have many coming to different locations, you do need to be a registered participant. So if you haven't registered via Eventbrite for some reason, suggest you do so. And we have some cool stuff coming to us from our sponsors in the way of products and gift cards and such. Does anyone else have any more questions? Or just glowing, we'll take glowing feedback as well.
I'm much better in person, I think.
No, I've enjoyed this. I've seen you in person. Yes, it would be better if we could have you in person, but this has been lovely.
Oh, good. No questions?
Just awkward silence.
Okay.
It's Friday here. I just wanted to add my thanks, Adrienne. It's been awesome listening to you and hearing the principles that my husband talks about so much. It's great to hear them from you too.
Oh, excellent. Good. Thank you.
To Adrienne, I'm not sure if you recognise the voice, but that's Steve's wife.
Oh, hi.
Hi.
in the chat from Emma, great session. Thank you, Adrienne. You were great virtually too. So sweet. And Gweno has said, hey, Gweno, has said, thanks so much, Adrienne. Julian, very interesting. Thank you. So, and Rowena, it was excellent. Thank you. Awesome. So it looks like people love it and they've got no questions because you've answered them all and just blown their minds.
I don't know, not quite.
So for those of you who are on the call, we do have a LinkedIn group that's been set up for connections between events. Yes, the session is recorded. Thank you, Kathy, for asking, because sometimes I forget to say those things. So we're recording. I can't tell you when it will be published. We've got a lot of events that we're running across the month, but it will go on the line for you to consume at a later date. And if you do have any other questions or thoughts that you want to share, I encourage you to join the LinkedIn group. I'm trying to keep on top of people joining that. And if there's a specific question for Adrienne, I will keep an eye out and tag her and see if she can help you. John Zhang has just asked, he said, thanks, Adrienne. Do you have any books to recommend related to this topic? Just point to the bookshelf behind you.
Oh, yeah. Well, no, you haven't seen the product bookshelf in the office. In terms of principles, look, it's very hard to find people to talk about principles specifically, but some of my ideas come from Ben Horowitz, The Hard Thing About Hard Things. Of course, in terms of product, there are a whole bunch of amazing product books, which if you've not read, I'd recommend you pick it up. Ken Sande, for example, I'm going to give him a plug, has a new one called The Inspired Product Manager. Everybody knows about Marty Kagan's book, so yeah. Dan Olson has one too. So there's loads of great product books out there. But in terms of culture, I always go back and refer to Ben Horowitz's work.
So you have Ben Horowitz. I'm just Googling those so that I can, oh, someone's showing links. What a legend.
The Inspired Product Manager by Ken Sande.
Yeah, I've got that one.
Dan Olson.
Dan Olson. That's what I did. I was not paying attention. Dan Olson. And any other ones?
Well, you've got Marty Kagan.
Marty Kagan. I should have, I've got Dan's book on my bookshelf myself.
Ah.
All right, I will, so I'm taking those down and I will tweet those out and also share them in the LinkedIn group for
Awesome.
for people who didn't have something handy to take them down. We've got probably about 9 minutes left, which we're happy to take more questions. I'm not giving Adrienne a choice, or feel free to take the few moments back in your day and leave. And thank you for being patient at the beginning.
We got
Could
there.
you
Yay.
provide a URL for the LinkedIn group? What a brilliant idea. Wouldn't it be good if someone had thought of that earlier? Let me just navigate one of my many screens I have open and I will drop it in there for you guys to see which of the 7 LinkedIn windows I have open that it actually is. Any questions while I search for the link for Trevor? Thank you for asking the question. Victoria's asked, what are some of the strategies you use to define the crux of the problem you're trying to solve?
That's a really good question. The first thing you need to do is you need to understand who your customers are. Well, and firstly, look, like everything, you take a guess. You come up with this great fancy idea, and you think, who might be the customer, the person? Let's go with person that might want to use this idea. And when I talk about person, I'm thinking like you kind of have to be detailed. People tend to go, oh, a small business person. Well, that's me and a whole bunch of, hundreds of thousands of others as well. So be very specific. Then you need to go, well, let's figure out how this person, lives their lives and works or whatever, however your idea might relate to this person's life. Then you want to kind of explore that. And what you're looking for is you're looking to see, when you do your research, whether this person has shown, indicated, talked about the problems, the issues that your product might be used to help solve. So the strategy is always around how to the strategy is all around understanding your customers and seeing whether they have that problem that your idea could potentially solve, your product idea could solve. That's the first thing that you would do. Irrespective of what else is going out in the world, you want to understand your customers first. Then once you've discovered, identified, seeing that there is that problem, and I think that my idea might be able to solve it, then you do further work. Can it solve it better than the other solutions? How is it in relation to the other products that are out there? Does that help?
It was a chat question. So yes, Victoria says great. Any other
Excellent.
questions? People have started to leave. That's always a good sign.
Oh dear. I'm not used to the whole kind of digital remote world yet. I think I'm getting better though. Talking to my
It's definitely it's helpful to have someone field the questions for you in the chat, which is what we're trying to do, because I think that's a challenge that a lot of presenters are experiencing, trying to engage with the audience.
Yes,
and
you're very kind. So thank you very much.
I volunteered for this job.
Oh.
All right, it seems like we don't have any more questions. So if people would like to drop off, you are most welcome. Thank you very much for coming along. Our next session, no worries, John. I'm happy to do that, and I will share those links elsewhere. He also said thank you for putting the book links in. I'll share them on all the things I share things on. And our next session is at 1 p.m. It's with the Swoop Analytics team, and it's about some amazing research that they've done with Microsoft Teams. I've seen the session already from another event, and they are a sponsor, so we do thank them for being a sponsor. But my personal perspective is it's a really good session if you're interested in Microsoft Teams or enterprise social media in general. So check that out at 1 o'clock on the schedule, and I won't be moderating that one, but I'll definitely be sitting in there and listening in again, because it's absolutely gold. And thank you, Adrienne, for doing the session.
Pleasure.
Thanks, Adrienne.
See ya.